This is a presentation of the LexRex Institute, where we're committed to ensuring that the law remains our only king and that everyone is subject to it, including our leaders. Hello, I'm Vanessa Haberbush, and I'm legal counsel to the LexRex Institute. I'm also a practicing attorney in Southern California. As always, nothing in this video constitutes legal advice. However, if you're looking for legal advice, please go to lexrex.org, fill out one of our forms, and you can have a free 30-minute consultation with an attorney to see if we can help you. So this week, we were asked, how do I know if my lawsuit would be better as a class action or as an individual lawsuit? What exactly is a class action anyway? You've probably heard about a class action and that type of terminology thrown around, and you may not know what it is. You may have gotten an email or a letter in the mail telling you you're a member of a class action. You're going to get $5 because of this class action. You probably never heard about the lawsuit, probably didn't know what was going on, don't know why you're included, and don't know what's being talked about, what the wrong was, but it's neat. You're like, okay, I'm going to get $5. And that may be your extent of class actions. So why are you getting these notices as a class action member, and how do they get started? Well, there's a couple people who decide there's been something that's happened that's bad. And there's been a lot of us that have been harmed in the same way, and I want to bring a lawsuit on behalf of all of those people. And so they will bring a lawsuit themselves on behalf of a giant class of people for the same wrong, and it acts as one lawsuit that benefits a bunch of people. You then will get an email or a letter telling you you're a member of the class and this is what's happening with it, and that's how you get paid. So you may be wondering, okay, well, is a class action right for my lawsuit? Why do people bring them versus not? Well, the important thing to know is that there's always at least one person, normally more than one, who is called the named plaintiff or the class representative. They are the plaintiff in the lawsuit. They're the person that brings it, they're responsible for it, and they have to do all of this work that benefits everybody else. So keep in mind that when you have a class action, it's not just you throw up your hands and magically get money if you are the one that's actually bringing the lawsuit. Everybody else, that's what you do. You sit back, you don't do anything, you don't even know what's going on, and then you get the benefits of the work of other people. So what do you need for a class action? There's actually several things you need. They're not the easiest to get, and so I'm going to go through them just briefly so you get an idea of the types of things to look for to see whether you could have a class action if you wanted to. The first is called numerosity. You have to have enough people that it makes sense to have a class action rather than individual lawsuits. So normally they see that there are so many people that it doesn't make sense to have individual lawsuits, and you can't what's called join members into the class. So in a lawsuit, you can do something where, like, let's say I sued a company, you could theoretically file what's called a joinder in the lawsuit saying I was harmed the same way, I want to be in that lawsuit. Well, if you have too many people, that's just a big administrative nightmare. The judge doesn't want to deal with it. Class is easier. The second one is called commonality. There have to be questions of law and fact that are the same for everybody. So if you have different things going on for different people, a class action won't work. It has to be the same things for everybody. The next one, third one, is typicality. The claims or defenses of the representative parties are typical of the claims and defenses of the class. What does that mean? The people that are bringing the lawsuit have to have claims and defenses that are similar to everybody else. They can't be having claims that are very different. So it has to do with, are they making sense to bring it as a class action? The fourth one is adequate representative. The class representative, the people bringing the lawsuit, and their attorneys have to fairly and adequately protect the interests of the entire class. One thing that's unique about a class action is that when you are bringing it and when the attorneys are bringing it, they are acting in a fiduciary capacity. A fiduciary means that they are holding in trust rights of other people and have to treat them accordingly. So you can't just dismiss a class action. You can't just settle a class action. There's a whole lot of requirements to ensure that it's fair and that you are doing what you can to represent the class as a whole. So it's important that you have people that are capable of doing that. You can't have an irresponsible person filing class action. If you're someone that says, I don't keep paperwork, I don't do these things, you can't be a class representative and file these types of lawsuits. The last thing the court will look at is there's various things that they'll say of whether there should be a class action or not. A lot of it's discretionary, and they'll look for things like whether there's a risk of inconsistent results. if they allow multiple lawsuits. So they may say, okay, it makes more sense to have a class action than individual lawsuits because if everybody brings their own lawsuit, some of them may be for the people that are suing, some of them may be who they're suing against, and that's not really fair and not really just. So in addition to that, the court may look at things like whether the class action is better than other methods available for adjudicating this dispute. It's really looking at what's fair, what makes sense, what is judicially economic, like how much work is it going to be for a class action versus something else, what protects people fairly. So I'm not going to go through all of the different factors that you would look at in federal court of what you need for a class action. I don't think it's the most helpful, but really there's a lot of discretion by the court to say, this is the best mechanism for making your case is through a class action. So it's not easy. You have to go into court and ask them to what's called certify your class. You have to get the court to agree that a class action is the best mechanism to get relief. So why would you bring a class action? Why wouldn't you bring a class action? A really good example of something where people often think of for a class action is, let's say a plane crashes. A lot of people are injured. People die. Some people are really seriously injured. They might be brain damaged, may lose limbs. Other people may have a couple, cuts and bruises. Well, a class action might be perfect for that. Everybody was part of the same plane crash, right? They all have claims that are the same against the airplane, right? Well, not exactly. That's where the facts are really important. You might have someone who is brain injured, lost a couple, both of their arms, and they say, I want to be a class representative for people that have had cuts and bruises. Well, those are not the same. They're very different injuries, and the brain injured person is going to have very different interests than those that are cut and bruised. And so a class action doesn't make sense for those types of things often. Now they might, if the injuries are more similar, but it goes into looking at all of those factors I talked about previously about, does this make sense? So the same thing applies for constitutional law, where you may have rights that are violated, and sometimes everybody's rights are violated the same way. Sometimes they're really not. COVID's a good example of that, where you have a lot of people who don't want to have the vaccine, for example. Well, some people are doing it for religious reasons. Some people just don't want it. Well, some people have medical reasons why they can't. And those are maybe very, very different situations where you might say, okay, class action doesn't make sense. Now, it might, but it may not. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So how does a class action work in terms of normally lawyers getting paid all of that? Well, realistically, the reason most class actions are filed is because the class action attorneys will get what's called a contingency fee from the damages that they get from the lawsuit. What a contingency fee is the lawyer gets paid a percentage of whatever they win. So they only get paid if they win, and they're normally very big, wealthy firms that know how to do these, and they look at the risks and they only take slam dunk cases because they say, I don't want to take a risk on a bad case because I'm only going to get paid if I get a really good judgment here. So that's your typical class action, and that's where most class actions come from. They're also typically cases where the individuals are not harmed that much. That's why you get the email getting $5. You were harmed not really that much. That's why you're getting $5 from it, and it's really not worth it to you to bring a lawsuit on your own because, okay, it's going to cost you a lot more to hire a lawyer, do a lawsuit, do all of the things that you need for it for, maybe $20 when you get $5 from the class action. So there's a lot of reasons that people file class actions, and it's often for money damages. Well, in constitutional law, you often don't have that. Especially for Lex Rex, we're looking at protecting rights and stopping people from doing bad things. We're not trying to get people millions of dollars for these things. We're trying to stop the government from encroaching on people's liberties and the Constitution. Well, a class action makes a lot less sense in those cases because if we win, we get a judgment saying the government can't do X, for example. Well, if I do that for an individual person versus a class action, it's going to probably result in the same thing. Just think about the cases that you have before the Supreme Court and how one church will bring a challenge, but then that's precedent that protects everybody because it's defining our rights. So often class actions don't make the most sense in constitutional law. So be aware of that. So we often get the question at Lex Rex, can I bring a class action? Is this a good thing for me? I know a bunch of people that were harmed in the same way that we were. For example, we get calls from parents of students and they know other parents of students at the same school who have the same problems with COVID restrictions, whether it's masking or vaccine mandates, whatever it may be. And they say, a class action, that's what I want to do, that would be perfect. Well, maybe not. They think the reason a lot of people think class actions are helpful and good for them is they say, well, it saves me so much work. I won't have to do anything. You know, I got the email where I got $5 and I didn't have to do anything. Well, yes, but you weren't the one bringing the lawsuit. You weren't the named plaintiff. Someone has to take the laboring oar, do all the work for the class action, which is just as much, if not more work, than if you just brought your own individual lawsuit, because you have to show why you should win, and somebody has to do that. You can't just sit back and do nothing and then reap the benefits of that. So if you are thinking a class action will save you time and effort, you're 100% wrong. It will increase it. It's also very expensive. At LexRex, we are seeking injunctive relief. We're trying to stop the government from doing things, for example, and we're not going to be getting a huge damage award. So somebody has to pay for the expenses of administering this class. There's a lot of notices that have to go out. So just mailing costs and printing costs alone can be astronomical depending on how many people you're dealing with. So that gets expensive, and that's where donations from people like you are really, really helpful to help us function and do cases like that. But it's also not entirely realistic when you're trying to get certain rights protected. So just be aware of that. If you are interested in a class action, or you say, okay, I think a class action makes sense, ideally, you're going to find at least one other person to be what's called a named plaintiff with you. You can do them with one person. That's normally not preferred. They'd normally like a couple people, because you're representing a lot of people. Just one person is going to be a worse representative than more, because you have more. We all know that more voices tend to give a more balanced perspective and protect more rights. So that's helpful. If you don't know people and you say, you know, I have a right, I think it's good for class action, you can still contact us. You can still tell us, I think a class action would make sense. Maybe somebody else did the same thing and we can do that for you. So just be aware that those are options. Also be aware that there are alternatives to class actions that may benefit you too, such as just bringing your own lawsuit. I think most people are more familiar with that. It's simpler, it protects you, and if you're seeking to protect constitutional rights, it's almost certainly going to protect everybody else that follows too if you get a good ruling on your behalf. And there are also what I'd call creative alternatives to a class action, which is like using the parents of students, for example. They might be able to form a nonprofit or an entity, an LLC of some kind, where they can say, okay, well, we don't really, I don't want to be the person that's responsible for all of this. Well, form an entity, have some people that are in charge of it so that communications and things can be done more as a group and as a group effort rather than one person. So those are things to consider, to possibly explore if you are thinking a class action would make sense. Finally, remember that LexRex focuses primarily on constitutional issues. So we're looking for constitutional protections and at legal issues related to them. So I want to thank you for watching. It's been fun having you here. I want you to check back next week for another one of our attorneys who will be answering our question for next week. If you liked the video, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. If you feel so moved, please consider making a contribution at lexrex.org/donate. Every penny helps. Seriously, we need help, and there are a lot of people injured and hurting out there, and every penny makes a difference. This has been a presentation of the LexRex Institute.